Is everybody joined?
I have yet. And I spent 8 hours.
Call the meeting to order.
Christmas break, trying to get Xfinity and Comcast to get that thing synced together where I could get emails.
Okay, I don't know why I'm not.
Mr. President,
Yep.
I move that the board approve the January 10th, 2022 agenda.
Second?
Motion's made and seconded.
Mr. President, I'm not in, sorry.
Oh,
Rachel,
Yes.
I don't know what's going on. It says I'm in, but
Did you join the meeting?
I clicked on join.
Try to
Yeah, get it click it on.
yeah, try to log it out.
Maybe I've been on too long.
Yeah, log back in and click join. And join. There you
Okay,
go.
thank you.
Terry and Alana.
all right. So I guess we'll start our discussion of Trauma Smart.
Dr. Hunt, introduce our panel.
I will. We have quite a few people here to talk to you tonight, and appreciate you taking this additional night out of the month to talk about Trauma Smart. We have a few goals for tonight. Actually, really two solid goals. One is we'd like you to learn more about Trauma Smart and the impact that it's had on our elementary schools so far, the strengths of the program, the reason that we decided to go with this program at the elementary level. The second part of that is to talk about what our future is. So we've talked a lot about other programs we need to bring into to be part of who we are. We've talked a lot about restorative practices. And we had that discussion about the need to try to find one major process or program that we would connect ourselves to so that we don't overwhelm our staff with too many programs and processes in place. And so part of what we want to talk about at the end a little bit is thinking about what we want to do to the future and how we want to involve Trauma Smart with our overall program as we move forward. So would that be something that we would want to do with just elementary, with K through 12? How would that look like in connection with other programs that we've discussed? So while we aren't anticipating any kind of a firm answer today, we do want to work towards that kind of a discussion and looking at what we might do in our overall program. So I appreciate your time tonight. I'm not the one that's going to be speaking a lot. We have several that are going to, but I'm going to invite Dr. Moore up. He wanted to have a couple words as well before we get started.
I just stay right here. You can see me okay. I'm not going to be long at all. Tonight I just want to introduce Matt Jones, principal of West Region, going to be talking, as well as Melissa Gabbard, principal of Spring Valley, and Michelle Jordan, counselor of Spring Valley. Their schools went through the Trauma Smart training completed last year, and they're going to talk a little later on. Before I have the next person, I did want to just, one thing it's important to me and to our our elementary schools and so forth with the Trauma Smart is we recognize that children, we can't prevent children from having a traumatic experience. Many of our kids are experiencing this, but what we can do is through this training help them to cope and recover. And we believe that will not only help them socially and emotionally, but it'll lead to better educational outcomes. So with that, again, thank you for the opportunity for us to talk about Trauma Smart today.
Good evening, I'm Robert Cordell, Director of Student Services. I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker for this evening, Leanne Kirk. Leanne Kirk is from Trauma Smart Training of Children's Crittenden Hospital, the St. Luke's Health System. As the director, she oversees the training of various levels of schools and staff for the purposes of training larger organizations. Leanne.
Hello, board. Thank you so much for allowing me to come and speak with you all today. My last name is actually Keck. I come from Crittenden Children's Center, and I'm the director of Trauma Smart. We are part of the St. Luke's Health System, which you all might be familiar with. We at Crittenden Children's Center have been serving the Kansas City metro area with supporting children and adolescents and their families with mental health for 120 years now. And part of that process has always been working with our community and really making sure that we are connecting education and mental health together. And we've been providing mental health services in our school area for probably over 40 years. Through that community service, we've developed Trauma Smart. So myself, having my start in the mental health field and being an individual school counselor at a preschool program, and then also doing private practice therapy with children and families who have experienced trauma. That is my background, working in hospice and with our veterans and our military families in addition to the school setting. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my background before I meet with you guys today, and I'm open to any questions or concerns you all might have as I walk through this, because I really want to make sure that you all feel informed by the time we're done. And if you see any barriers that you're worried about, please feel free to ask. Okay. So the Trauma Smart program has been operating now in the Kansas City area since 2008. We got our start in the Head Start, and over the years have transitioned from urban areas, rural settings, suburban areas, and have gone now in 12 states nationwide. With this, we have learned a lot from our school settings and working in different school districts, learned that our program has to evolve and change, social emotional curriculum being the foundation of that, and ensuring that Trauma Smart is not there to replace your social emotional curriculum. It's there to actually support it and be a strong foundation so that you're able to best support the children that you're working with. So I want to make sure that that's really clear, that we're not competing against social emotional curriculum. Sometimes that can be confusing to schools. As I said, Crittenden Children's Center works with a lot of our community settings, and we are one of those organizations in addition to foster care. So we know that in our area there are a lot of children from our foster care program at Crittenden Children's Center that go to school here at Raytown. There are many other experiences of trauma that our children are experiencing day to day, and that is a foundation that definitely impacts their education, which is why, as you'll hear in a little while, some of the successes that just operating in a manner in which our children have experienced trauma, so have the adults that we're working with. And those caregivers' support of developing resilience are going to be a key portion of this. Okay, so some of the goals within Trauma Smart. Reducing the negative impact of trauma and building resilience. So as I mentioned, that focus on trauma is going to be key in developing that resiliency that's the foundation when we're working with education. In addition to making practical strategies, we don't want to just come up with these elaborate plans that are not feasible to apply within the classroom setting or at home. So it's really important that we do a whole community environment and allow everyone that plays a part in this to be developing these strategies to work with our kids. That involves the whole system approach. With that, I want to share a little bit about our timeline. We want to make sure that there's a lot of time that goes into this pre-planning conversations. And that is something that we started working on multiple years ago. So those that have already implemented Trauma Smart know that we started discussions probably over 3 years ago. Beginning that planning, talking about all the logistics that go into training, all the supports to make sure that you've got support not from just the top up, but from the bottom up too. So we want to make sure that we're meeting from both ends and that staff are being engaged and they're excited about the information they're going to receive. And that staff buy-in really shows at Raytown. So as we talk about some of the successes that we're seeing in the schools, really a lot of that has come from the key leadership support and how it was introduced to staff, involving them in the process, letting them ask questions and challenge at time and say, hey, you know, this just isn't working. We're experiencing a lot of trauma. It's interrupting our education day in and day out in the classroom setting. So we want to make sure that we're meeting their unique needs. The implementation stage is that second stage where we're really there providing the staff training. And I'm going to dive into that in a few minutes, a little bit more detail. But that is where Little Blue Elementary and Robinson Elementary are in that implementation stage this year. So they're about halfway through their training. They've been receiving consultation services, and they are midway through. Sustaining phase is the end. So we want to begin with the end in mind. We want to make sure that over time, you're not having to find funding year in, year out to contract with Trauma Smart. We want to make sure that whatever information we're giving you, you can carry on every year and support new staff when turnover happens. Hopefully, not as often. We want to support that retention. But at times, there are going to be new staff that come in or needs change. So we want to make sure we're supporting with the end in mind. So the Trauma Smart approach. The key is that you have somebody guiding you through this journey. A lot of times, individuals will start, and big school systems will want to start a trauma-informed journey, but they get overloaded with all of the information. So it's nice to have somebody that has worked with many different school districts and also gets to know you all. So what we don't do is we don't come in and say, this is what's going to do, what you all need to do, this is what you need to change. We want to hear about Raytown School District. We want to hear about each of the individual buildings, what their students and their families and their staff are experiencing. So it's really important that you bring that community aspect into it and get to know each other. It's a partnership. So the consultant's there to guide them on this journey, not instruct them on what they have to do to become trauma-informed. With that sustaining aspect that's really going to be key is that you develop a trauma-informed care team at each building level and the district level. That's something that's really unique to Raytown School District, is that there is a very clear district message that supports this trauma-informed initiative, which is why we've heard from many schools that they want this information too. They're like, man, we've been hearing about the great successes at Western and Spring Valley. We want in on this. So it's really important that that building level has key buy-in that can run and develop what are those goals that we're hearing from our staff. What are they needing? What do we want to focus on to have support? Now, the staff training component that's a little unique to Trauma Smart is that we invite everyone from in the building to come to training. So this is not just teachers and paras and administrators. This is front office staff. This is custodians. This is the cafeteria and the support services in every aspect. Okay? So anyone that can come into contact with the children, we wanted this training. Because it's not just about understanding with the trauma lens about what has impacted our children and families. It's what impacts us day to day. So we can apply this information personally, not just professionally, so we can better be capable and aware of what things trigger us as adults, and then how it comes out in the classroom or how it comes out in our interactions with each other and with the kids. So with teachers having so much burnout and stress in our world right now, even more so, they've always had this, but it's really been heightened the last few years. This is going to help them recognize and own that. And you'll hear a little bit more, but in some of the handouts you'll hear about the successes and how this information has helped them even personally in feeling ready and capable to take on the day when they come into the building. The next piece, these two next ones actually kind of go together. And with this, these are the sustaining aspects. We want to make sure that there are key individuals within every building that are able to support their peers in applying the information that they're hearing in training. So we don't want you just to go to training and spend a day or 2 days of PD and they're taking great notes and thinking about all these things you want to go back and apply. It's what we found over time is if you have a coach on site that supports you in applying this information and helps keep it top of mind and in front of you, you're going to have better rates of applying it. Smart connections, that is our caregiver education, or what some might say our parent education. But we know that there are many caregivers that support our kids in our lives. We want to invite everyone. We want to make sure that they also have the same information that our staff are having at the schools. Because at some point, these kids are going to go home, and then they're going to go on to the next grade, and they're going to move on in their lives, or they may relocate. We want to make the largest impact we can on that child's life. And that is really key to make sure that they're hearing that common language at school and at home. We also want to make sure that our consultant is connecting our families and our school counselors with therapeutic resources that are trauma-informed. And so this may be hey, let's talk through how is our referral process working? How are we identifying children and families that we are providing resources for mental health services outside of the school environment? And how is that working? Do we need to invite others to come to our training? Do we want to do some of our SMART connections with and invite their therapists at times? So this is really that whole collective community aspect in trauma informed. And then I'm going to speak a little bit more about the sustaining power and what those components include. Okay. So with your consultation component, each of our schools receive consultation, somebody that's directly identified and assigned to their building that's going to work with them. They're going to be the one that is most often providing the training and the support services, meeting with them a few times a month, checking in with their trauma-informed care team and seeing how they're doing so that they can walk them through their journey. And some of the ways that they can do this is might be talking about each of those components that I just went over in the model and making sure that each of them are working, they're not running up into any barriers, make sure that it's working smoothly within their school. It might be talking about meeting with your counselors and saying, can I shadow you and walk you through the day and start recognizing natural opportunities to apply that information that we're talking about in training. It's also going to be talking about, there we go, policies and procedures reviews. The trauma-informed journey is not a quick one. This is a long-term journey. We oftentimes talk about how it does not end at one point. That being said, it doesn't mean that contracting with Trauma Smart means that it's forever. What it means is we get you started. We build sustaining power so that you have a strong trauma lens and you're able to analyze, hey, is the way that our school is operating, the way that our classrooms are operating, the way that we're working and supporting one another and working with the kids, are we using our trauma lens? We're going to be sharing some successes, but that is a big part of consultation, is recognizing the progress along the way. Sometimes we get so focused on the end in sight, and we say, oh my gosh, we're so excited about becoming trauma-informed, and we think we're going to absolve trauma by the end of it, like we heard earlier. It's not going to stop trauma. We're building resilience, and that's not just for the kids. It's difficult. Our teachers are experiencing secondary trauma every day. Teachers are not just teachers nowadays. They take on so much. And the support services that they have within that building are so key in keeping them coming in every day that we have to recognize. We have to take that time to step back and say, hey, where are those successes? And sometimes we lose sight of that. And that's just part of the stress and the secondary trauma that happens every day. And then there are always times that things pop up in the middle of the day that require a little bit of analysis and processing. And it's nice to be able to have somebody else to bounce those ideas off of and make sure that you're on track. And so that's another aspect. It's a safe relationship that's there, that they know whatever they talk about is going to stay in that environment. It's not going outside of that room. So as I talked about our staff training, you're involving everyone. So some individuals might say, well, why would I come to this staff training? I'm not a teacher, right? So the difference is like I mentioned earlier, you're applying this as an individual. So there are many people that I have heard, I'll tell you one quick story. When I was working with one of our local schools, we did an initial presentation, something similar to this, to individuals that were in leadership positions, and we were just getting ready to start with them. And so I had somebody come up, and he was the lead custodian. He said, well, this was so great, it was really nice to meet you. I probably won't see you again, but I'm excited for everyone to get started. I said, well, what do you mean? You're going too. What are you talking about? You're going to be there. He said, wait, why would I go? I'm not a teacher. So I talked to him a little bit more. He said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So just go and see what happens. So he went. I saw him after he had been through, I don't know if he had made it through all of them, but he had been through quite a few. He kept coming. And he told me, I'm so glad that you told me that. If I wouldn't have ran into you afterwards, I wouldn't have shown up. And I would have missed an opportunity. Because I was at one of our main buildings and happened to be going down the hallway, and I saw one of the kids walking out. Looked fine. It didn't look like anything was going on, but I just said hi to him and said, hey, how's your day? And he started talking to me. And it wasn't anything, he didn't open up to me and tell me, his life story, but instead he just said, thanks for asking. And so we got to talking, started telling me about football that he was playing. He started telling me about a math test that he had, and they just got into a conversation. And I left that day feeling like I made a huge difference in that child's life, that he needed that connection in that moment, and I needed that connection in that moment. He goes, man, I left that day and I was feeling like really invigorated about my job, that my job had even more meaning than I was even aware of. So it's things like that that make the difference. It's that connection, that foundation of relationships that are key. And our trainings are really interactive. We want to make sure, unlike today where I'm just talking to you, it's very interactive and activity-based discussions, sharing and applying directly to your buildings and in those environments. With that being said, everyone is going to want to know what kind of model are you using? What is the evidence-based practice in this? So we use the ARC model, and this is, we build on this model that's called Attachment, Self-Regulation, and Competency by Margaret Blaustein and Christine Kinnenberg. And we partnered with them for many years to help build what was meant to be a therapeutic group setting for youth in a mental health environment to a school setting. And so we partnered together to make sure that this approach would work. And as you'll notice here, it's built as a pyramid. The foundation is the attachment. If strong attachment is not there, this whole thing will crumble, right? So it's really important that a strong foundation is built with the caregivers, so with each other, within our school environments, and also with the children. And then from that, once that strong safety and that foundation is built, you're able to help them support and identify their own feelings, work through problems. With that foundation and structure of trauma-informed attachment, you're going to help them be able to process information. So I've heard lots of reference for restorative justice. This is going to support that. This is an opportunity that you help. We have things called classroom lessons where we educate the kids about their brain structure and about where they're at in their brain and how they can identify when they're ready to learn and process new information, and then be aware of their feelings so that they can acknowledge where they were coming from when they maybe acted out in a way that has gotten them into some trouble now, and how important it is to repair those relationships so that you can move on and become, successful in your school environment and outside of school. And from there, once that ability to be aware of your feelings and then be able to express them in appropriate ways and calm yourself when you're feeling either really excited or really nervous or really upset, then that's when executive function, your ability to learn in the classroom, comes. So they build on one another. That's really key. Sorry, guys. A little stuff there. So sustaining support. We had talked about a trauma-informed care team in each building. And with that trauma-informed care team, you're going to have individuals that are specially trained outside of just the regular staff training to become qualified to train new hire staff. So when new staff come in, you can train them. They're also going to be qualified to help coach, do peer coaching, and train and offer support for caregivers. So that's going to be really key to continuing. Not sure if we're running low on time.
You're fine.
Am I doing okay?
Keep going.
I don't want to waste any of these.
You're good.
Okay, so with that, attendance in the academies is key. You're also going to be able to continue with providing consultation so they can support them as they go along their journey and identify action steps along the way that might shift over time. And they're also going to make sure that it's a focus on your education. So I'm going to share a couple of successes. Not to take away, I know you ladies might have some more to share, but these are just some of the references and successes that came out of our schools that we've started with. Brain as a car is an analogy that we teach staff and the kids to understand the different parts of your brain and how our emotions are linked to them. And so many people, we've heard many times that has really been something that they've used within the classroom and also at home. It's also increased understanding and empathy for others. And I also wanted to share one more quick thing. So this is the what we call program feedback. We collect something that is called the ARDIC, the Attitudes Related to Trauma-Informed Care. And that is a qualified assessment that allows us to really do a pre and post analysis of how people are using their trauma lens before they receive training and services and then after, and then we collect that after year. This is more of a documentation and a collection where we ask staff to share a little bit more of their practical application. So we talked a lot about practical application, and that being one of the goals of Trauma Smart. And with that, when we asked Spring Valley and Westridge, what did you learn, or how is Trauma Smart supporting you? So along the process, these are the things that they said were really key. So 81% of the attendees at the presentations said that they're better able to remain calm and supportive when children are in distress. So it means now they're more aware of how they respond in their own body, and they're able to manage their own affect or their feelings or moods to better support the kids when they're having big feelings. The other one, 79%, which I feel like goes along with that definitely too, is managing their own affect. So when they're having a tough day, they're better able to manage it, so they're not taking it out on the kids. It's not stopping their learning. It's not a barrier for them in the classroom. And then I would say another key one, after 1 year, having big behaviors in children have decreased 23% of the time. So I wanted to share a little bit with you all from that. And I appreciate all of your time, and I will be available for questions whenever you guys have.
Thank you very much.
Should we wait?
If you want to ask questions along the way, it's great. I will tell you that we will probably answer a lot of them
Okay.
as we go through the presentation, but please stop us if you'd like to as well. Either way is
I
fine.
can wait.
Amanda Keen's going to come up next. She's our behavior specialist, and she's going to give us a little bit of a bridge here. It's not you, it is the clicker. It is a little bit.
That's helpful to know.
So I'm just going to really quickly, it's not going to take very long at all. You guys are probably aware that we already utilize PBIS and we already utilize BIST within our, especially our elementary schools, but with all of our schools. So I'm actually a BCBA. I'm trained in behavior, and I have spent the last several years working on that specialization that I have in behavior and how to increase or decrease it with trauma and how that impacts it. I've done a lot of my own research. I'm actually one of the trained people that Leanne was speaking about that can train new staff, that can coach, that can train, and that can also meet with like families and caregivers. So, but I have spent, if the clicker works, I have spent time with PBIS, so the tiered supports of the 3 supports. So at the bottom, we have our universal supports. That's our tier 1. That's what everybody gets. And then that tier 2, that small group of students who they just need a little bit more. And tier 3, our highest level of needs. And this can be academically, this can be behaviorally, this can be with our social emotional curriculum as well. So we have those tiers for everything. And then we look at BIST that we have, so our goals for life. I can be okay even if others are not. I can do hard things, or I can do it even if I don't want to, or it's hard. And I can follow directions even if I don't want to, is the other one. They get a little bit mixed up. So they take that, partnered with grace and accountability, so I understand that things are going to happen. I'm going to help you through that, and I'm going to hold you accountable for that. Because of that relationship that's built. So, and providing the students what they need. So these are just quick overviews of things that are already within PBIS and BIST that pair really well. And we've been using those to we've been using Trauma Smart to change our view with some of that. So using that trauma lens that Leanne mentioned, and having that trauma lens become our foundation. So in Trauma Smart, they teach that we're changing our thinking from what's wrong with them to what happened to them. And so using that as our basis for our tier 1 supports. Using that as our basis for our tier 2 and our tier 3 behavior plans. What might happen to them at home? What might happen to them outside of school that we can't control, but we can put supports in place to help students be more successful on a day-to-day basis. So we pair it all together really quickly. So we use Trauma Smart as our base, and so we use this trauma lens to impact the effectiveness of what we already have. Because nothing within this harms kids who don't come from trauma, but it benefits those who do. And it also helps staff a lot, has the potential to. So this becomes our foundation, and within BIST, our relationships get better. And our ability to identify those missing skills is broken down. We utilize that brain as a car because it tells you if you're in this place of your brain, if your car, then this is what you need. So if I'm in my back seat, I need connection. And so we take that to identify those missing skills. And then I was talking to somebody, and I don't remember who, but our Tier 2 and our Tier 3 plans, specifically within Westridge and Spring Valley, are so much more thoughtful. There's more proactiveness. There's more thought put behind everything, and we're going to do this because this is what we need. And our Tier 1 supports are better. So when we have better Tier 1 supports, we have less kids that need Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. And those that do really, really get what they need because we're using this trauma lens to increase how our plans are written. So I just kind of wanted to share that this does already work with practices that we're already using and that we use really well as a district, I think, because they've been around for quite some time with us. But that is all for me.
We're going to have our buildings come up and talk about how Trauma Smart is impacting their own building. And so from Spring Valley, Mr. Gabbert, Michelle Jordan, one of our counselors in the district, and Matt Jones from Westridge, and we're going to start off with Westridge.
All right, good evening. So I wanted to start off with the ARC model, and as mentioned before, that it's the foundation of everything, that kind of the root of Trauma Smart, and it's kind of already mentioned as well, though, that although this is rooted in the practices of trauma, that the strategies that we implement are the best strategies to use regardless if trauma is involved in the behavior or not. That this isn't specific only for trauma, but really the practices and more so how we react in those situations to hopefully more proactively reduce where students increase behaviors versus and bring those behaviors down as opposed to continue to act out, or when those big behaviors that occur where other consequences have to come in place. And at Westridge last year and this year we focused on two areas specifically. One of them, maybe, is in that bottom foundational layer of attachment, and specifically focused on attunement, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then the second area was put a lot of time and effort into the idea of and the model of brain as a car. So I wanted to start first a little bit and discuss that concept of brain as a car. And a quick shout out to, oh, look out. Haha. A quick shout out to our former counselor, Tanisha Love, Emily Rooney, our social worker, and Rachel Barzy, the admin intern at Westridge. They're responsible for a lot of these slides, especially the brain as a car slides. These are actually taken from the lessons that we did with our students in the classrooms to teach the concept. So I just wanted to go kind of outline a little bit for you guys today. As kind of previously mentioned by Leanne, brain as a car kind of explains just how our brains work. Depending on where we're feeling, what's going on, how we're responding to certain situations or stimulus, we are at different parts in our brain. And really, our brains really aren't much different than they were millions of years ago when we came and wandered around. It has two jobs: one, to make sense of the world around us and ensure we survive in that fight or flight mode if we're worried about our safety. And so the idea of brain as a car is to teach this model, so not only it does help our students, but really helping our staff knowing where certain reactions are coming from, why they're happening that way, and what's the best way that we can provide that support. So at the front seat of our car is that prefrontal cortex. That's the part where we have our logic, where we make our intentional decisions. And just like in a car, I'm in the front seat, I've got the steering wheel, I've got the gas, I'm dictating where we're going, how we're going to get there. I'm in full control. And that mirrors to where we are when we are in our prefrontal cortex and that front part of our brain and the decisions that we make. Sometimes things happen that might increase levels or emotions, and we start to have somewhat of an emotional reaction, whether that is frustration, anger, excitement, happiness, any sort of feelings we have. That's when we can move into the back seat of our brain, that limbic system. That's what drives the emotions and feelings that we have and start to affect how we react in those situations. It's actually why, when you don't necessarily have the words for decision, but you're like, it's this gut feeling that I have, that comes from the limbic system because it isn't associated with our words like the prefrontal cortex is. It's associated with that emotional feeling that we have with that. And so being able to describe this as being in our backseat is something that our kids can connect to, that we can all connect to, and understand that, if I'm not in the driver's seat, I'm starting to have these early feelings. And what does that mean for me? And what do I need to do about it? And our goal always is to help not only us be able to identify our kids when they're moving to the back seats, but eventually kids being able to identify that for themselves and self-regulate so they don't end up in the trunk and then having a big reaction that might create into a bigger problem. And then of course at the end, we have the trunk where I'm completely in the brainstem. That's where we are in that caveman fight or flight. I've got to survive this situation. I'm in danger, and having that big reaction to that. And so in this breakdown, obviously it's not as important for our kids to know these three areas and these words, and when it comes to the actual parts of our brain, talking about what it means to be in our front seat, what it means to be in our back seat, and what it means to be in our trunk. Scared to press it again? Aha. So these are just an example of the lessons that we'd have with our students, is that with teachers we would talk about what does it look like to be in the front seat, what does it look like to be in the back seat, what does it look like for you to be in the trunk, how do our bodies feel, what does your face look like, what are you doing with your hands. We also talk about what are things that put you in the back seat, what are things that put you in the front seat or the trunk. This is we found to be a powerful part, and part of the reason why we focus so heavily on brain as a car, because we all have this common language and this common understanding. I could say I'm mad, but what mad means to me is different what mad means to you, and what mad means to you, and what mad means to you. And also, I can be mad and be in my front seat. I can be mad and be in my back seat. I can be mad and be in my trunk. Having these specific actions, instead of describing potentially the feelings that we have, but more so where we are within our body and where we are within our brain, has helped us provide this common understanding and common language with our students, that as we pair that with attunement, and I can see a kid walking down the hallway and they seem to be upset, I might be able to stop and go, hey, are you okay? I notice it looks like you might be upset right now. Your eyebrows are bent over, your hood's up. Is something wrong? And it looks like you might be in your back seat. Being able to say that, having that common language, kids can more understand that we're forward. Man, you look like you're mad. I'm not mad. Okay, well, yeah, I guess you're not mad. It helps kind of get that commonality and then be able to more consistently define what that actually means, as opposed to just relying solely on what emotion they may or may not be feeling. The other powerful note is this, as I said, is it helps. When we have these conversations with our students, it helps them identify those triggers and what might put them in those areas. So the more that they become aware of what puts them in that space and why it puts them there, then the more consistently and the more likely they're going to eventually be able to come to build up that skill set to self-regulate, or know, hey, I better not go and, I know that if every time I try to play kickball and Matt Jones is there, he always cheats and it makes me mad and I get upset, so I'm not going to go play kickball today. Starting to become aware of our triggers, what might cause us to feel certain emotions or feeling. Okay, so just kind of in summation of why we chose brain as a car, as I said, it provided that common language. The car is a visual representation. It's almost concrete in the fact that every kid knows what a car is. Every kid knows what the front seat and the back seat of the trunk is. So we all have this kind of common understanding of where it is within our brain. It's easy to replicate and connect to. Before this, historically at Westridge, we've done 5-point scale or zones of regulations where kids are kind of identified where they're at. But again, that can be somewhat ambiguous to our kids, and it could, where I'm at on green or red or orange might be different for somebody else. But again, having kind of this more concrete and easier to apply and understand front seat, back seat, or trunk You could go into Westridge right now and ask most students, where are you right now and why you were there? They will be able to tell you whether they're in the front seat, back seat. If they're in their trunk, they might not tell you they're in the trunk in that moment, but later on, when we go back to it, we'll be able to talk about that. And so because it is this less ambiguous thing and it's more consistent throughout, it does help kids become more skilled at having that self-regulation, being able to monitor myself and know when I need help and accept that help as I move from the back seat to the trunk or vice versa. This is an example of a thing sheet that we use, and this is just how we paired Trauma Smart with BIST. Part of BIST is having an opportunity to process and talk through when a problem occurs. And one key element that has been really powerful with Trauma Smart, where all the strengths that BIST has, is that again, the focus on the practices of the adults, how we respond to behaviors in students, and how our own inner feelings might affect that response, has been, I think we've seen the biggest impact with that at Westridge. And an example is something as simple in this thing sheet, where when we've had thing sheets in the past to process through what happened in BIST, the first question was always, what was the problem? What could you have done differently? But when we talked about this as staff, I remember one of the questions I asked was, if you saw, let's say, a teammate or a friend and you saw they were very upset, what's the first thing you're going to ask them? It's, are you okay? What do you need? And that when we focus specifically on the accountability, all of important and needed, when we do that first without making sure we have that relationship and that connection there, that's what creates the power struggles, that's what can create the resentment and potentially push buttons to then cause a problem to grow, as opposed to what we're really trying to do is intervene, help de-escalate, and partner together to help fix. And so even a small switch like, where were you in your car? What put you in the back seat? Instead, it's more, what happened to you here? Why did it put you there? Okay, now that we know that that situation can put you in that state, what do you need? What does that look like? And then what do you need in that moment so we can help you so it doesn't create a bigger problem for you, or so it keeps you from progressing down where you might have to leave the classroom? And how can we help support you in that moment? And so it really kind of has helped shifted what our intention of the conversation is. And we still get to the accountability piece. We still talk about what would be better choices. But it allows us to first connect and be in that moment, as opposed to just going straight to, what did you do wrong? Here's just an example of what we have for students, the primary level that may not be able to fully read or write yet. Icons that we use to help again drive those conversations. So next is our focus on attunement, which felt paired very well with Brain as a Car. And essentially the concept of attunement is being able to accurately read the cues of another person. Basically being able to see them and empathize where they're at, and then from that getting to a point where I can figure out, here's what might be going on, how can I help you with that? And as you can see here, there's a little bit better, there's a cycle or kind of steps that we go through as we intervene in a situation. So the first thing that we do is notice. Check in, really when we talk about notice, it's first notice where I'm at. Am I in my front seat? If I'm not at a spot, I can't match intense behavior with a tense, or tense emotion with a tense emotion. All I'm going to do is continue to elevate that. So if I'm, as the teacher, if I'm involved and I'm upset about something and I'm trying to intervene, I might need to do some more self-care before I do that. Does this have to be addressed right at this moment? Do I need to call for help and tap out? So that way that I'm not throwing gasoline on the fire and making the issue grow. Once I know that I'm in a good spot, then I'm looking at, what do I notice about the student? What are they telling me that they might need or be feeling? Then the next thing is I'm going to name that. Like in that example here, you're scribbling on your paper. I might look and go, hey, are you okay? You look like you might be frustrated. I notice you're scribbling on your paper. Is there something I can do to help? And then in that validated, maybe the student goes, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to do this. Man, I know when somebody asks me to do something and I don't know where to start, I get really frustrated too, and that's hard. How can I help you? Would you like me to review the questions, or can we do the first part together to make so that you know how to start and where to go next? In that moment when we use attuning, it's powerful for a lot of reasons, but the two main reasons why we decided to focus on it, first and foremost, is it forces us to be self-aware, to not contribute and grow to the problem, where we get into those power struggles, or again, where high emotion meets high emotion and just can kind of come to a head and make things worse. I have to be able to stop if I'm going to notice myself. I have to stop and notice the student, so it prevents me from reacting to whatever's going on and being more of a support and help. Secondly, it's in the moment learning. It's a learning experience right then and there. It's a teachable moment. that if a student isn't fully capable yet of identifying what emotion they're feeling or even what that feels like, in that moment I go, hey, you're feeling frustrated because of this. And so they can even go, oh, I know in my old behavior skill days, we talked about your body's like a car. I like a car too, and how your engine's all revved up and it feels like it's going like this. So we can sometimes help our students connect to that and know, hey, this feeling right here, when you start to feel that, you know you're heading towards your back seat, and potentially some of our students real quickly heading to your trunk if we don't do something now when you start to feel that way. And that's okay. I know we found when we were having conversations, so many of our students, feelings and emotions, especially anger, was something that just happened to you. You didn't have control over it, and oh, I just won't get mad anymore. And we're having a lot of conversations, you're gonna get mad again. Everybody gets mad. It's knowing that and how to react to that. So attunement allows us as the teachers to stop in the moment and go, hey, here's what you're feeling. Here's what we can do about it. Here's how I can help you. And so when our students begin to feel that with not just their teacher, but every other adult they act to, they start to build up this vulnerability and trust that in that moment, think about it, when we're mad, sometimes it just feels good to stay mad. I don't want you to help me right now, I just want to stay mad. So by having this continuous of attunement, our kids, we kind of, one, teach them that emotions aren't things that happen to you, they're things that are always going to happen, and we have control in how we respond to them, and then continually supporting through that. It also helps us learn our students better so that we can be better caregivers for them when they need us in that time, when they start to shift from their front seat to their back seat or trunk. So kind of as I said, our focus on why are we kind of stuck with the attunement these first couple of years is, again, it helps with that care affect management. First question is noticing, where am I at as the adult? Am I in my front seat? Am I in a good place right now so I can respond appropriately? Or is this, did the kid push one of my buttons? Is this one of my triggers and I need to step back and take a second before I interact or react to a situation? Limits reacting to that behavior. Rarely do we immediately react to something and react in the way we am, because we're probably in that emotional things. We're not in that front seat fully thinking about our actions, and we're going to say something or do something or put a consequence in place that we can't follow through or create a power struggle that we didn't really mean. Cause us to slow down, stop, think. Intervening and supporting, as I said, and then finally, the wrap-up teaches students the specifics for self-regulation. In that moment, teachable moment, teaching them, here's what you're feeling, here's what drove that, here's what we can do in that moment to help bring you back to your front seat so then we can make logical responses. And then finally, this is just an example of also the marriage of Trauma Smart and PBIS. A component of PBIS is creating a flow chart of how to respond to negative behavior and what's expected of students and teachers. And so the team and I, we got together and basically kind of more front made the changes so it matched our process and what we'd expect of students when it comes through Trauma Smart, asking what students look like, where it matches and what the caregiver looks like and what they would be doing, and then the reactions and reflections are questions that teachers can ask of themselves, and guiding questions that we have when we have our behavior DRT meetings, or even an individual teacher when we're talking about behavior plans or what might be going on with the student, is looking and self-reflecting on where in this continuum as a student exhibits certain behaviors, and what are we doing as the caregivers to support them during that time.
Kind of in the middle, the middle box, reactions and reflections, it says, do I need to protect them from a missing skill? What does that mean?
Sure. So many times students tend to struggle and get in trouble in situations in which they don't have the skill set to manage yet. Let's say if I have a really hard time, let's go back to Matt Jones at kickball. He cheats all the time because he hates to lose, and he doesn't really play well with others super well. And so if I know that about him, but then I continue just to let him play kickball every day and get in a fight and an argument every day, I'm putting him in a situation that he didn't have the skill set yet. I have to protect him from that and teach him that skills before I allow him to do it again. The most logical comparison I can make is I wouldn't give a first grader a third grade book and say, hey, you should be able to read this. It's kind of the same exact thing. Good question.
Hello. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for allowing us to come. My name is Michelle Jordan, and I'm the school counselor at Spring Valley Elementary. And I'm just going to talk about mindfulness for a moment. So looking at this picture, I was told that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And if you look at this slide here, it puts Thank you. This puts mindfulness in the mode of exactly what it is. So if you look at the picture to the right, you see the dog who is just living the simple life. And he or she is just taking what life has given him. And there's just not a lot in his thoughts. However, the person on the left has a lot going on. And when you think about what we're experiencing even now with the changes of COVID and all of the different things in our jobs and in our lives and our personal family lives and people that we love, our lives at this point in time will put us in our back seat. And as Matt was talking about, when we are in our back seat, we're needing safety. That is what is the need. When we're in our trunk, we're needing safety. Please forgive me for that. In our back seat, we're needing connection. And then when we are in our front seat, we're needing meaning. And so what mindfulness does, it allows us to pause just because, so that we can be able to move from our trunk into our back seat, into our front seat. It allows our brain to take a rest from what is happening in life so that we can function. So it's really about awareness. It's about allowing us to reduce stress. It allows us to be more powerful in our productivity, and it allows us to increase our self-regulation so that we aren't as anxious as we can be, especially when the kids come in. At Spring Valley, we have a whole school mindfulness mode in which we started last year. Ms. Gabbard allowed us to start it last year. And at the start of our day and at the end of our day is when we do it. And so what happens is every teacher gets a login and they click on a link, and then there's a mindfulness. It's just 5 minutes or less for all the kids to take some breathing. They do some breathing. We're going to practice here so you can get an example of what it entails. But what that does is allowing our building to calm down, and no matter what's on their mind, in that previous slide, as you saw, there could be a lot going on in their minds, but it allows them to move from, hopefully, their back seat into their front seat. When the kids come in, we have Brain as a car, and they're able to check in with their teachers, and the teachers will then know where they are in their car and what extra tools that they might need along with the 5-minute mindfulness that we do at the beginning of the day. And the reason we do it at the end of the day, of course, is because it's transition, and we would like for all the students to leave without having a lot of stuff going on in their minds. So these are some of the quotes that some of the people here stated about mindfulness, and I'm not going to get lost in reading it, but what I will say is that what it purposely does is it allows people to just stop thinking about all of the to-do lists, to stop thinking about all of the issues, and it allows them to just be present in the moment. And I know that sounds kind of weird, especially if you're not practicing it or you're not familiar with it. However, as time progresses, it becomes more natural, because in our brain, as Matt was referring to and all of us have been referring to with a car, when you look at it from a scientific point of view, you have, and it was already mentioned, where the neocortex is considered the front part, and that's the front seat in which you're doing your thinking. Your limbic system is where your emotions and the amygdala is connected. And your reptilian is where your inside organs are working and functioning. That's your breathing. And so what happens is when you are in your back seat in your trunk, and you can flip your lid when your limbic system and reptilian link up together, because the amygdala will start producing certain hormones and cortisol and different things that will trigger your body and your breathing to increase. When you are taking those deep breaths, it will calm that amygdala down to where it's not presenting as much cortisol, it doesn't pump as much, and it slows it down where you can think clearer and you're able to connect in your front seat. And as you know, some of you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's the same thing as it relates to the brain, that correlates, because if your needs are met at the bottom tier, your basic needs, then you're able to have those friendships and have more self-awareness with self-esteem and feeling belonging and loving and connecting. That would be, again, the middle part of your car, the back seat of your car, actually. And then you're able to then have self-fulfillment and help other people. So as we move on, there it is. Uh-oh. Okay. Mindfulness has a lot of benefits. It increases all of the things that you see there. It also allows people to be able to connect with themselves, and then that will allow them to enhance relationships with other people. So just for a moment, let's just take a moment to breathe. So you don't have to close your eyes, but if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes. But I'm going to cue us to breathe in and breathe out, and you'll get an example of what our kids experience daily. So at this time, I'm going to close my eyes, if it's okay with you. And I would like for you guys to breathe in with me, and I'm going to do the counting with us. So we're going to breathe in through our nose, and then we're going to breathe out through our mouth. So here we go. We breathe in, 2, 3, hold, and breathe out through your mouth. 2, 3, 4, hold. Let's try that again. Breathe in, hold, and out. Hold. Last time. Breathe in, hold, and out. Now I would like for you just at this moment to think of a quiet place in your mind. Think of a place that makes you feel safe and a place that you feel happy with. And think of people in your life that you love. Just think of that person in your mind. And I'd like for you to just imagine doing some of the things that you enjoy doing with the people that you love, or at that special place that makes you happy. And let's breathe in, hold, and blow out. And then as you think about the people, I'd like for you to just think of one message that you can say to that person. It may be, I love you, I miss you, I enjoy being around you. Just one happy affirmation that you can say to that person. Breathe in, hold, and blow out. And then come back to the sound of my voice and open your eyes. So that's just a simple segment. There's more to it when what we do in the building. But just for a moment, it allows you to just think about the here and now and not even the presentation.
My special place was Dairy Queen. I don't know. I feel better already.
Yes. Michelle creates these great videos for her kids every day of the school year. So they're amazing.
Well,
She creates.
and I will say that a lot of times, Mr. Moore, people do think about food. And in the video, I do talk about food. So it's part of your happy place is when your tummy's happy. And that Olive Garden was amazing.
Everybody's happy.
So along with mindfulness, we also have calming kits and tools for each classroom. And I'm going to go in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. But these tools are not just to be given to kids for them to just play with. What they are actually doing is they are actually being mindful of what they're doing. So just like in differentiated education, you have to differentiate how you're going to instruct certain kids because of their needs. The same thing works with calming tools and mindfulness and grounding senses. So in that respect, when at Spring Valley, what we do is we teach a process when they receive these tools. So before the kids use the tools, teachers have to introduce and model how they can use them safely. So when we think of modeling and practicing, we actually do this when they are in their front seat, so that they are actually finding meaning when using these tools. And then that way, when they're having these big emotions and in their back seat, they automatically know what tool meets their needs. Calming corners can look very different in various classrooms. Teachers have the option to choose where they would like to have it and what they would like to have in their calming corner. But the basis is K through 2, they receive a bag of tools along with the process of the breathing strategies. And then we also incorporate yoga, because when trauma is more than just in your brain, it's also in your body. And so when you're doing these breathing strategies and you're using your yoga strategies and posing, you're releasing the cortisol and those hormones, like I mentioned earlier, as they practice these things. And so this is just another example of other tools. And you can even see on the right, it's a chair. It's not necessarily a corner, but it's a chair, and they have the calming tools on the chair versus having it on the floor. So it's just a space for kids to be able to take a moment to breathe. The other one also on the right, you can see a picture above. I don't know if you can see it really well, but it's a picture, a playful picture. Kids choose the type of pictures that make them happy. And they design their space so that when they go there, they can really become mindful, they can do their breathing, and they'll be able to calm themselves, their own bodies down and their own minds down based on what they like. And this is also a place where they practice. They practice this throughout the day and as needed.
Does each classroom have that?
Yes.
Okay, so I am going to talk about the self-care aspect. And this slide was added because somehow we forgot to add this when we originally sent it, so my apologies. So self-care is essential now more than ever, it seems like. And we know that we must focus on our staff so that our staff can be in a good place to focus on our student needs. So last summer, Michelle and Tanisha Love, who was at Westridge, did they became part of the curriculum summit where they do PD for teachers, and they did a PD or presentation on self-care, and they use this acronym GRAPES, and we try to utilize this at Spring Valley when we are implementing self-care with our staff and with our students. So gratitude is being thankful for what you have in your life, and so at staff meetings we try to sit with other staff members from different teams so that we can get to know what other people are thinking and doing. And I always pose a gratitude question before the staff meeting, and they know to get started on it if I'm not there, because sometimes I'm late with dismissal. And so some of the questions that I posed are like, what are you thankful for, or what has made you happy this week? And then they talk about 5 minutes amongst their group, write down what their, whatever their answer is to the question. And then we do a share out, and you share out about somebody else, granted that you've asked them, hey, is it okay if I share about you? And so that's one way that we can learn about others and build relationships and show gratitude all in one. Relaxation, exercising your brain, slowing it down in your mind also, with your mind also. And our TIC team is a wonderful group of 5 that work very well together, and we decided to give self-care breaks to our staff. And Miss Jordan, bless her heart, is the one that mostly tries to get that done, but the rest of us help when we can as well. And so she has gives teachers the opportunity to take a 15-minute self-care break, and she has set up in her awesome room. I wish we had pictures on here of it. When you walk in, you feel like you're like at a spa. There's like a waterfall thing, and the kids love it. Kids can go in there for breaks, as well as her groups that she does. But teachers can go in there. There's an affirmation wall. We put our own affirmations on there. We put affirmations that we've got from other people. There's fidgets, there's calming music, there's tools, there's sand thing that teachers can use. And then, of course, there's snacks because, food makes people happy, and I like to keep my people happy. So we do these breaks on a rotation. We also have, like Matt was talking about, brain as a car. We have brain as a car for each teacher in our teacher's lounge over in a corner, and our TIC team rotates to check in to see if there are teachers in their back seat or their trunk, and the staff utilize it. And then that way we know to go check in on them. Hey, what can we do for you? Do you need a break? Do you need me to do something specifically for you? So that has been really, really good. We just implemented that this year, actually. And then we move on to affirmations, true and positive messages. You tell yourself that help you feel relaxed. So again, we have those in the counselor's room, and we have self-affirmations in our teacher's lounge as well. And staff can add their own affirmations as well if they find one that they really like that they want to share with the staff. Pleasure, fun activities that you use that use your senses. And so we try to, one, like I said, food keeps people happy, or it does at Spring Valley anyway. So I offer a snack cart. I do that on DRT days when I meet with them once a week about data. I offer it on Wednesday meetings and also during staff meetings. Sometimes I will change it up if we have a PD day. We will do breakfast. Sometimes if we're staying late for a special meeting, we will do like chip salsa and cheese dip. We will do Sonic drinks. And in the fall and spring, when the weather's a little bit warmer, we will do different ice cream. And we do those things for kids as well as staff. And then we do Trauma Smart refreshers at our monthly meetings. And so we try to implement activities that teachers can take back and use in their calming corners or use with their students. And they usually involve the senses. And teachers love creating them and love that we've taken the time to do that with all of us rather than just giving them paper and telling them, hey, you can do this on your own time. So we're pretty meaningful in it. And then exercise, physical activities that get your body sweating and your heart pumping. I don't know that we try to do that during the meetings like that intense, but prior to meetings and through our wellness leader, we engage in breathing or like Ms. Jordan said, yoga positions or moves. And again, we do that sometimes in between presentations, and it just kind of refocuses everybody, and then teachers also will go back and do those things with their classrooms. So what we're doing with the staff, they're able to do with their kids as well. And then socially, spending mindful time with those you trust, in person, on the phone, or online. I personally have made it a priority to have one-on-ones with staff so that I can get to know them. Not necessarily just about what they are like at school, but about their personal life, what their goals are in school, what their goals are outside of school as well. And then mixing up the staff at meetings, this also builds opportunity for relationships to be built within our building. And I think you can really tell this year that staff don't just have little cliques among their people that they see every day, that second grade team together all the time. You see other grade levels coming together, and so that's been really nice. So to tie all of that together, in December I did a snowman hunt where I tried to bring all of our self-care pieces together to make it an opportunity for all of the staff members, for GE, kitchen staff, custodians, everybody that works at Spring Valley, they were a part of it. So I hid snowmen in the hallways. They had numbers on them. The teachers and all the staff got to come and hunt for them that Monday. And then they had a number on the snowman. They then came and got a coupon from me, and the coupon was something that they specifically got to redeem those next 12 and a half days counting down to winter break that we were all looking forward to. And so some of the things that I gave were I gave self-care bags to some of the employees. I gave a winter snack bag. I gave a free lunch from Jason's Deli to some of the staff. I did a self-care break where I went and read to the students while they had a 15-minute break, which I love to do, so that one was probably more fun for me. And then I did Sonic drinks, Quick Trip drinks. Oh, and I let a few people pick a day that they could leave early, and myself or my admin intern would take over their duty. So just a little thing. It was little to me, but it was really big to the staff. And so those are some things that we do at Spring Valley to make sure that self-care is happening with students. Thank you.
All right, so we have time for questions.
So one of my questions is, you talk about Trauma Smart doesn't harm the kids who don't come from trauma, but helps those who really need it. So are you seeing those kids who don't come from trauma relate better and in more positive ways to the kids that do experience it? What's that look like?
I think that honestly, trauma happens to everybody in some form or fashion. And so what is traumatic for one is, again, different for another. And I do know that it helps all children, regardless to what upbringings they've had or where they come, because day in and day out, kids are going to have some type of interaction that's going to make them feel dysregulated in some fashion. And that's traumatic for them. And so yes, I believe that Trauma Smart connects with all kids, no matter, and that's how it connects with all kids.
And it's connecting them with one another on top of that?
Oh, with relationships? Yes.
Yeah, I can, I think that's universally, that's a long-term goal where we see that, but I definitely can think of examples where students are better able, especially in situations where small things fester. Believe it or not, 2 4th grade girls that heard one girl said something bad about the other will hold on to that for a few months and never speak of it. And so there's been some opportunities where we've been able to sit and talk about that, and I feel like the conversations that we've had, I don't know about you guys at Spring Valley, but like where when we have those time to talk through things, they might be a little bit more in tune to speak specifically to not just what the other person did, but how maybe that made them feel or how that contributed to the problem growing. I think, although I don't have any specific evidence, I feel like that's probably a part of the impact that Trauma Smart has had, and us being able to specifically connect those things.
I can, on a programmatic standpoint too, and I have heard different stories of successes within different classrooms and within the buildings, but one of the biggest things is that Trauma Smart speaks to a culture shift in an environment, in a trauma-informed environment. And so with that being said, the focus is relationships and building empathy at the same time as developing those trauma lens. And when you're also applying things like brain as a car and attunement, you're modeling for the kids how to attune to one another. And so then they're beginning to attune to one another in addition, seeing that that's okay. When teachers provide that kind of an environment that it's safe and it feels safe, then they're going to start noticing when their neighbor sitting next to them is having a tough morning. And they might even start noticing, well, when I have a tough day and I come in and I put that I'm in my back seat, now I'm noticing that my neighbor next to me is saying they're in their back seat today. Sometimes when I'm in my back seat and I need connection, it feels really good when someone comes and checks on me. I'm going to go do that too. So you start seeing that skill development happen at a really young age.
So how effective has this been for students with a particularly high number of ACEs?
I know that we don't officially can collect any information that tells us how many ACEs a student would have. So I don't know if we have any specific data based on that, but a lot of times in my experience, the students that would have those higher numbers are the students that I work with a lot, because they're the ones that are on that level, that tier 3 behavior or that tier 3 social emotional, and they're still not progressing. And those are the kids that I think teachers can get really burnt out on really easily, because it's the same kid every day, all the time. And this really brings that level of awareness of, oh, well, they're doing it because this happened and they don't know how to deal with that yet. So it kind of is like, because teachers, our goal is to teach. And so, well, now you told me what I can teach, and I can teach this skill that they're missing. So I think that would be that tie-in, that benefit that I see.
Thank you.
And just to add on to that, although I don't have any specifics directly tied to, again, individual students' ACEs scores, as a general, over the last, was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, over the last 8 years, created one of those is a year and a half of that is last year and the year before, wackiness of COVID, but on average, recovery visits, so those are major behaviors that have to leave the classroom, typically something substantial happened. Our average is around, over the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over the last 5 years, the average has been about anywhere around 4 reactive visits a day, so 4 trips to recovery a day for the building. This year, we're at slightly over averaging 1 a day. So, and then suspensions numbers are also similar to that. I think that directly has a direct correlation to that.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. So, first of all, a couple of general questions and follow-up. What other districts are using Trauma Smart, if any?
I can speak to that. Hickman Mills School District, Center School District, Shawnee Mission School District, Gordon Parks Elementary, and we have some Boys and Girls Club and YMCA before and after school programs that are in a lot of the school districts.
And how long have we been doing it here?
This is year 2.
Second year.
And we want to add 3 Trails is also in their first year.
3 Trails. Okay, so how did we pick Spring Valley and Westridge to get started, and what's our plan to take this to the rest of the elementary schools, or time frame?
Well, I met Jerry Jacobs 3 years ago, and I used to teach jazzercise. And she, at the time, was I don't know what her position was.
President at Crittenton Children's.
Thank you. And I had done my master's is in how trauma affects the brain. And her and I were in some discussions about trauma in the brain. And she's the one who informed me that Crittenton had this program. And so Tanisha was one of the people that I always linked to as far as over the counselors. And so I told her about this program, and Jerry met with Tanisha and myself, along with Dr. Mixon, I want to say it was. And she then shared this information to us. And so it was, Dr. Mixon, I'm not sure how you guys chose Spring Valley and Westridge, but I don't know if it was because Tanisha and I had.
I think we already had that connection.
Yes, since we had that connection with Jerry, that's how we were able to get it started. And then this year, I think they're doing 2 schools per year. Is that correct?
Yeah. And part of the reason for the 2 schools a year thing is we had grant money that's able to sustain us through that. But moving forward, we do see the power of this. And so sometimes we'll dive into something kind of as a pilot and see how it's working. We've seen, and you've heard some of the data, it's been tremendous. We've had great success. We think it's worthy of going district-wide for our elementary schools. We actually have talked about a plan that Dr. Cordell is working on, where we would bring on the rest of the 6 elementaries on into their year 1 next year. So we really believe in this.
What would that,
President Barton.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Deaton.
President Berman. Thank you so much for the presentation, Dr. Jones, Ms. Jordan, Ms. Principal Gabbard. I love the passion and love what you've put into the program to develop the program. and clearly is off to a great start. I think that Trauma Smart as their foundation has made a huge difference based on what you have shared with us today. I am also excited that the whole staff, the entire staff is involved, and that they have an opportunity to participate and become trauma smart themselves. Ms. Keck, you mentioned that the part of the whole system was multi-generational. And I don't know specifically what that points to when you talk about multi-generational. I can think of the parents and the caregivers, but that's parental involvement and part of the trauma connections. I don't know what the whole system, how it relates to being multi-generational as well.
So what it's speaking to is that trauma can be passed down through generations. We're talking about also grandparents raising kids, right? So we have a lot of different caregiver levels. A lot of families are living in one home. When I was growing up, I had my grandparents there, I had my parents there. You know, you have to speak to that. There's also generational trauma. There's, with that, it's how we experienced growing up, how it impacted the way that we parent. And that goes into the foundation of our SMART Connections, the parent education component, where we're talking to caregivers. And it's in a safe environment that recognizes how we bring our own traumas into how we interact with each other and with the children. And it's not shaming, it's just acknowledgement. I'm not saying that that anybody's done anything wrong as a parent. It's that sometimes there are new ways that we are just learning about and talking about. And so to acknowledge that and how we bring our own traumas and how that impacts the way that we parent. So that is a huge component of the model. And so multi-generational goes through our caregiver education component in addition.
Wonderful. Also, in regards to SMART Connections, how are the parents informed of how to support Trauma Smart in the home?
We've talked a lot about this, like myself with Emily and Ms. Jordan, the social worker at Westridge. And unfortunately with COVID, we haven't been able to do as much of the SMART Connection that we wanted. Because it's hard to bring in a whole bunch of people. But you guys did a virtual one last year, didn't you? You guys did a virtual one. Somebody did a virtual one last year.
Yeah, we did.
I think we both did.
Tanisha did too. We did 2 sessions virtually with our parents, and we received great feedback from our families in regards to the virtual SMART Connection sessions that we've had. We are going to do 3 more. This year. This year, virtually, I'm sure.
Yes.
We're in the planning process of that, actually. So, yes.
And that content can also be delivered one-on-one. So sometimes there are families that would prefer to have that one-on-one and not do that in a group setting, especially if there's some children that you're working with that are on those higher tiers that need that more intensive work. And so you want to have more one-on-one engagement with the families. You can also use that same information and then work at your own pace instead of as a group's pace.
Last year we did something similar. We actually had a 3-night event close towards the end of the year that was all virtual on different grade levels, different topics, but it included some of the learnings that we were doing. We also had parents sign up, and so then we sent materials home. Like one of the things that we did is we taught them how to make like a weighted rice sock. So that when you have, and talked about what a common core in an area, and probably need to revisit myself as a parent sometimes of getting into those power troubles with our kids, everything goes out the window. And it was really encouraging because we were worried this close that for us, it was that close to the end of the year, everything already going on virtual, but the positive feedback that we got from that. And so definitely looking for more opportunity to do that. And then also said, I know especially with our social worker and with where it also plugs in so well, like our connections right now with, it just left my brain, the counseling services that we Kappa, with Kappa, that sometimes that does in conjunction with the counseling that the family or the student is getting from those professionals. We're able to kind of triangulate, speak the same language and work together. that fits in that same kind of mold of here, hey, here's what they're hearing, here's what the therapist said, here's the supports right at school, here's how that can be mirrored with you and your family at home.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
The number of schools that you listed there that are involved with it, are they doing it K through 12, or is this just mostly elementary?
Elementary.
Well,
Oh, no,
That's
she's
it.
talking about the others.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. There's varying. So Shawnee Mission, it's elementary age. Hickman Mills, just this year we finished going all the way through high school, so they have had pre-K all the way through. With Independence, we did their early learning sites. Center actually received funding, so they're going to be finishing elementary and going through middle school and high school coming up this next year.
Are you finding the same success at the high school level that you are at the elementary level, and it being accepted as enthusiastic as this is, it sounds like?
Well, we are in our beginning of our piloting, so we've only worked with Hickman Mills and actually applying and doing the implementing stages of the high school, the middle school, and the high school. The one thing, because we're learning every time, we want to get feedback. What we have learned that it's really key to get that building buy-in level and that district level support. And so if the prioritizing of trauma-informed foundation is key, which from all of my experiences, that is really set in tone here, that is going to increase the likelihood of success because it's already being a priority. And the biggest, I think, factor in whether or not middle schools and high schools continue, and this was an issue with when we started with elementary schools, is how much time it takes to train. And so the commitment has already been made within the district, and there's been some models for success, and it's difficult. Training calendars are difficult to take that time. It's a huge commitment on time-wise. And so I think that time and resources that you all have already committed is going to be lay that groundwork for success over time.
we use the time when the new buildings, so like Robinson and Little Blue are doing their first year training. We use that same time because we know it fits within the elementary PD schedule. We use Wednesdays. And that's when we take all of the new staff from Westridge and Spring Valley, and they all come over and do their training as well. So that way we're able to sustain that second year. And that way no one building is really responsible for making sure they get the whole 10 modules.
I have another question that's somewhat related to that. Since we're only in year 2, we don't have that much experience yet, but, so this is great. Everything is sounding great and going well, but we're seeing, one thing that we're looking at dealing with is this, but our secondary students that are having issues. So even though we've been at a short time, what do you foresee and what specifically will you do with 5th graders to help them retain this and take it with them forward in the 6th grade, even if there's not yet an established program there?
Some things that we started last year, besides the calming corner information and the calming corners, is like Matt was saying earlier, when kids start, talking and saying, "Hey, I have a problem," and using their words, or like someone that might be quiet, someone's doing something to them and they kind of are just shy and quiet about it, don't say anything. We've done a lot of peer mediation. And I think getting a peer mediation group going with the secondary would be beneficial in my experience as a former middle school person. If we can get those 5th graders kind of trained in that aspect, some of our students, I think that moving forward might go well with the Trauma Smart as they move on.
My question was sort of maybe something similar, but just taking it even more so, looking at that secondary level, and just you're talking about having common languages and you're teaching your students ways of being able to regulate, and you're talking about, the brain is a car and all of that. And I know we have interventions at the secondary level, but I was just curious if there was any transition plan between the two levels of school. So like what that looks like, and I know this is new, but just you guys' thoughts on that.
With students that are specifically higher needs, I do get to work K-12. So a lot of those students I will go to this next level with and be like, hey, these are the supports that they had in elementary school. These are the supports that are written in their plan. Here are scripts. Here are all of their visuals. Here are everything that you might need, because you don't know this information yet, but they responded really well. And let's work on, if we have to, adapting it and changing it so that it's the same language, but it might look a little bit different, so that it's something that they have that understanding with. But I worked with a lot of 6th grade this year, working on that, because the 5th graders at South Middle is the 5th graders that came from here. So.
If I may, too,
Yeah.
the true answer is we don't have anything formal right now.
No.
And we do need to think about this as a K-12 issue. We believe firmly that what we talked about today with trauma-informed education, it needs to be K-12 no matter what we do, no matter what decision we make. That trauma-informed education needs to be in our system K-12. And all the plans that we have brought to you include that as being a component that moves throughout our entire system. So that could be in one of two forms. So it could be that we do Trauma Smart all the way through 12th grade. We could do Trauma Smart in conjunction with something else, but as you probably got an idea, Trauma Smart is very involving. It's really at least a 2-year process to get a building spun up to Trauma Smart. So if we choose to do that, anything else that we would want to do would need to be delayed. Or we would need to remove other things in order to put it into place appropriately. So as a for instance, if we decided that we wanted to do restorative practices in the middle schools, we would have to either do Trauma Smart first, let it go through the 2-year implementation phase, and then start restorative practices. Or we would have to do restorative practices, which does have a trauma-informed component, and just use the trauma-informed component of restorative practices instead. Now, the restorative practices component that is trauma-informed is not nearly as in-depth as the Trauma Smart training, because restorative practice has a very large training component for it by itself. So, one of the things I told you we talked about towards the end, or at the end, was really what do we want to do as we move forward? What does the board see as being our best steps as we move through this? Quite honestly, we do believe that the program that we have in place with Trauma Smart, BIST, and PBIS is the best process for our elementary schools. We've seen good success with it. We've seen our discipline rates drop. We don't have the disproportionality in elementary school we do in secondary buildings. We believe that that is a good team of supports that works very well together. The problem with Trauma Smart in itself is it's not complete. And so that's why we have the BIST and the PBS component in addition to the Trauma Smart component. You really do need to have the triad together to get that complete picture. We could do that in middle school because we have seen success with BIST and PBIS in middle schools as well. Stop laughing at me. We all heard it. So we could do that combination in middle schools as well. And that would be very beneficial. We believe it would be effective. Or we could go the direction of having, just using the restorative practices in middle schools. We do believe if we go restorative practices, that does fulfill the other components. We would need to remove PBIS and BIST and just do the restorative practices in middle school. We do believe at the high school, we need to make a rather large change there. PBS, BIST are ineffective at the high school. We know this. And so it is ripe for a complete overhaul where we might have the restorative practices as the components for high school. That doesn't mean that we couldn't start with a Trauma Smart first at the high school level to get a deep training in this and then back it up with restorative practices. You just can't do them concurrently. Or we could just do restorative practices and lean on the trauma-informed portion of that training. So that's looking forward, as the kind of ideas and the process, the different directions we could go. But to your question, Ally, we do feel that it's important that we have the entire package, and we want to do it K-12. It's that important. Well, really pre-K-12. We got 3 trails doing it too.
I had a question. The first one's kind of a 2-part question. It might seem kind of a stupid question, but I want to know what is trauma, and are all big behaviors a result of trauma?
Trauma is any, oh, go ahead.
There we go. I was waiting to see who was gonna.
Go ahead.
No.
You're having some trauma right now.
I was hoping.
It's any situation, and it's different depending upon the person. So it's any situation that will make the brain dysregulate and trigger an emotion that is big to impact a person in a way that they're not able to function in a normal capacity. It is different in the sense of what may be traumatic to me, in the same situation may not be traumatic to Ms. Gabbard. So it's an individual experience that dysregulates the brain and that jolts the whole person to where they cannot function productively. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Are all big behaviors?
Are all big behaviors trauma?
I would say behaviorally, all big behaviors, no. Big behaviors are there because of trauma, but sometimes they're there because they work. Because when I go to level 10, they go to level 10 and I get what I want. I mean, honestly, behaviorally, sometimes it is that black and white. All big behaviors can cause trauma. It can cause trauma for the adults present. It can cause trauma for the other students present and for the student themselves. But things like disability or mental health issues or trauma or just the behavior works are reasons that we see big behaviors. So there's a lot of different things that can cause that, but it's
It seems
definitely
like
not.
the answer would be yes. I mean, it seems like everything's traumatic. But, I mean, at some point, if it's causing some type of irregularity in the brain or something, the reason I asked that question because I guess we wanted to find out more about Trauma Smart in regards to our discipline practices and in regards to our disparity, which I don't think we have that issue in elementary. So I'm trying to figure out how this relates to that.
The prevention.
Not that we wouldn't need Trauma Smart. It seems like something this is definitely good. And I look at, I guess the success that you're speaking of is the percentages by the time you get to Module 10, which I think that's a great measure of success, but I don't know necessarily the reason why we brought up restorative practices. I don't know is that being addressed in this?
That is one of the reasons why I started off the way I did, is saying, although this is all rooted within Trauma Smart and that the practices that are in place are the best practices in responding to behavior generally. That how, even using attunement of seeing behavior, naming and being able to stop and preventing myself from reacting, is it going to solve every big problem and every suspension? No. And without looking at the data in front of me, though, I would venture to say that a significant amount of our big behavior problems, I'll speak in the elementary and I'll even speak to West Jersey's world, started in small problems. Somewhere along the line, that if we had a better job of being able to identify, or the student be able to identify themselves, might have prevented it from growing to a point where, like in the example I gave, where 2 4th grade girls are mad because somebody said they looked ugly 2 weeks ago, and now they're looking for little things that grow and grow and grow until eventually it becomes this big fight and suspensions happen. That when we can teach these skills and students become more effective, it helps prevent that.
And that's the case across the board. All of these trauma smart, restorative practices, all of the component of relationship to try to understand where students are coming from. And then methods of trying to modify, redirect behaviors. Because I'll take yours a bit further. You know, you said are all behaviors, they start with trauma. I will say that you can generalize and say all big behaviors start with something. There is something that has moved them to this point. It could be a chemical dysregulation, and we need to work with their doctors to get medication to help them. It may be because, like you said, it works. And so we find other methods of being able to change their environment rather than go to this direction. But all behaviors have some sort of impetus to them. And these trainings help our staff to be able to identify and modify these kind of behaviors that predispose for the big behaviors that we don't want to see. So yeah, and actually it's back into PBIS talks about that. You know, finding out what these predisposing behaviors are so that we can try to avoid them as we move forward. But really it's all about relationships, about understanding students, about listening to them and seeing who they are so that we can make modifications with our own behaviors so that we don't escalate behaviors and take something that's small, like maybe it's just a conversation between two girls who don't understand each other well, to something that's large, where there is big behaviors that now we end up having to use the discipline policy for.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to add, you know, as I mentioned earlier, Trauma Smart's not there to replace social emotional curriculum. That's really key. That's really important. So Trauma Smart is a prevention-based model. And the idea is that if we develop our trauma lens and we are more aware as the caregivers, that we're going to be able to catch those things early, de-escalate them, and help model how to do that. And even recognize and verbalize to the kids when we feel frustrated. So if we're able to regulate ourselves as the adults, we're then modeling for the kids, it's okay to get upset. We all do. And here's a way that you can modify your own affect and be able to regulate yourself when you're upset and move from that back seat to the front seat, even though you are upset. And so I think that that's been key because a lot of our stories we've been telling kids for so many years is you can't be mad. You can't get upset. And that's just not realistic because as adults, we all get mad and upset and frustrated and scared and nervous. And so it's what you do with that information. And I think it humanizes the teacher to each other and to the students. And that creates that sense of safety. And it takes that step back to say, you can be a really great teacher and have a great relationship with your students. And you can have that personal connection with the kids. And actually that is going to help them develop and grow and be more open and willing to learn in your classroom. And then we are more willing to learn to put that lens on and notice that, man, I'm going to get curious and ask what's going on with that child when I start seeing these behaviors. And instead of just assuming that that kid's being bad in that moment or having an issue, what's wrong with them, we're going to say, man, it's the same time every day. It's the same, you know, something. What is it that's triggering? And then you start getting curious and investigating and start realizing that there's so many other factors that come in. And then we stop the blaming and the immediate punitive response and reactivity and instead take a step back and try to keep them in that classroom instead of sending them out, which then separates and teaches the children that it's not safe to express themselves.
Are you seeing the same rate of success for secondary?
We don't have all the numbers yet back because they're just finishing up their first full training year. What I will see or say is that I have seen referrals go down. I have seen behaviors go down. I have seen a lot of reports from teachers just saying, hey, I'm feeling more connected to my students. The biggest thing is that the classrooms that are applying those classroom lessons, like we saw Mr. Jones sharing and teaching, actually involving the kids and learning about their brain and how it's impacting them, providing that to that secondary level of education is huge. They're realizing how their brain's focusing and impacts their daily life. So I would say that I hopefully have something by the end of this school year to prove that. But I think the biggest thing is that the leadership application of this and consistently applying it and really supporting the long-term sustainability, we're seeing that shift from pre-K through high school during those transition periods. Even between the alternative schools and the secondary providers, now they're really working on a smooth transition where those kids feel supported moving into an alternative school and moving back. So those are things that are not to numbers, but situations that weren't occurring before, that I know is building that safety for those kids.
I don't know if you know, but do some of those school districts have restorative practices as well, right?
Not consistently applied in a full model yet. But there are some like that have been in talks of that's the next step, now that they have this foundation for trauma-informed. And they feel like it will support, but they wanted to have a trauma-informed foundation first. So.
Mr. President, I like some of the components of the program. The only thing that's missing for me is that this is more of a preventive. The training and everything is to prevent students or to assist students that are having behavior challenges. But when that kid does do something, I don't see anything in this program that comes back to try to assist the kid rather than being punitive, but being maybe working it out rather than having a kid to be suspended. So that's, overall, I think it's a good program. It sounds good anyway. And, but I would like to see restorative justice and that working together, because I think it would bring a wholeness to the student's life. It's the before and then it is if something should happen.
And Bobby, to that extent, that's why I said that there has to be a combination. BIST is really that component in elementary schools. That's where we go through the whole process. When a student does do something, you know, we have the safe seat, we have the buddy room, we have the recovery room, we have this process to try to work that student back into the classroom setting. It's not completely perfect. We do have students that are going to do things outside of that process, but it is largely effective. And so that's why I say we feel that we have all the components in place there where it's effective. Where we start to lose that as we get into the older grades. Especially in high school, we don't have the PBIS and the BIST component in a solid manner. We've got to have that other component that restorative practices brings.
Yeah. I would look at it, although it may not be formally there, it is a natural, I feel like a natural byproduct when our whys and how, especially teachers perceive behaviors and how they might be apt to respond to it. Where in the past where, oh, the student's disrupting my class, for example, the elementary level, you need to go to buddy room. You start to see a shift in teachers' mindset where it's not just, here's this behavior, here's this kind of robotic reaction, and more so seeking to understand and intervene in a more productive way of exactly what you're talking about. What's causing this? How can we fix this? And working on that together. I can definitely speak for Westridge in that there were times where that piece was missed. But as mindsets and understandings and perception change, so did our reactions to that, which, in my opinion, our consequences kind of fall under that umbrella.
And I keep thinking of one of our students in particular who has made a huge shift, and it's because his mindset, he thinks of strategies and things that he can use from mindfulness and from breathing and from just taking a 5-minute break on a trampoline that will get him back, or doing a buddy walk with an adult to get him back on track. And he uses his words and he actually asks for those things rather than reacting, falling out, acting out, and then has to have like an escort come. So we have seen that turnaround in elementary with some of our kids who were close to possibly a tier 3 or a tier 3, and now they've moved to a tier 2, or even not even needing a plan at all anymore.
Are you seeing the example you just gave there? and I don't know what the academic level was of that student, but when the student figures this thing out for themselves, and of course the teacher then figures it out for themselves, are you seeing a huge increase in their academic level too, or?
Yes, he's being a ton more productive with his work and willing to put effort through than he was ever before. Well, he is spending 90% more time in class rather than in recovery.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and his family also, his mom is doing some of the same. She has some calming tools at home and is trying to utilize, because she's talked a lot with the teacher, she's talked a lot with our interventionist, myself, and with Ms. Jordan, and so she has changed also. So that has been very eye-opening as well.
I would venture to even add that, as I talked about so many of our kids thinking that emotions and feelings are things that happen to them. Also a mindset that learning and quote unquote being smart is something that happens to people. It's getting lucky to do it, not seeing the direct correlation to opportunity, work, and result. And as we open up these avenues and starting to feel the first step in becoming successful in using replacement behaviors is actually believing that I can do them and that it's going to work. So these successes, I think, open up the doors to them start to take those risks and believe that, oh, I do, if I do listen to what my teacher says and I do practice this, I'm not going to fail. It is going to work. That's a jump that has always been hard for, I feel like, many of our kids to trust that and to go, why should I try? Even if I try, I'm not smart, so it's not going to work. It's kind of helping us open that avenue.
He even got to attend a PBIS party for the first time, and he's in second grade.
There you go.
So he was ecstatic about it.
Do you think it might be a little bit resistant to those things as they get older? I guess,
Well,
I'm thinking more into the secondary, like they were saying, we don't really have a foundation of BIST and PBIS. And
So the Trauma Smart training, I do believe is going to be effective all the way through. Because here's the thing. You've got adults that will look at a student and think they're just being bad, right? And so what Trauma Smart helps you do is it helps the adults to change their mindset to think not what is wrong with the child, but maybe what's wrong with the child. You know, it's not the behavior that they're exhibiting right now, but what's going on behind that behavior. And so getting to know that child and understanding where they're coming from and maybe addressing some of the behaviors that are creating the behaviors. So it really is about changing the mindset of the adults, which helps to get students to understand maybe where they are. And so yeah, that's effective all the way through. We have found that BIST and PBIS aren't as effective because, quite honestly, the kids have been doing it since they were in kindergarten. And once they get to high school, it doesn't matter, you change the language, they know what you're doing to them. They know you're BISTing them, and they resist it. They see it as young behaviors. So that's why really at high school, we almost need to just do a complete revamp of it and just change things around. Now, in middle schools, we do see PBIS and BIST effectively. We do need an additional component, which the Trauma Smart is going to bring. We think that would be a very nice addition that's going to help our staff change their thought process about our students, which is enormous.
When I was working at Northwood, I was an NWSA teacher for my last 3 years, and my first year there, we started just being trauma informed. So this was 3 years before I started doing this, before we started Trauma Smart. But just that trauma informed piece and that lens there, and I worked with high school mostly, and they were kids that weren't okay in their school and had significant mental health issues potentially, and they would come there, and I saw less big behaviors with them than I see with some kids in our other schools, because our entire staff were there and ready and cognizant of this is probably something bigger. How can we help teach them how to deal with this? And so we used some different curriculums and stuff, like when Matt mentioned that 5-point scale and zones of regulation fit really well in with Trauma Smart. I was zones of regulation for 3 years, and I did it, and I spoke it, and my IAs spoke it, and all of our kids spoke it. They'd say, man, I'm really feeling like I'm in the orange zone right now. I need to go take a walk down the hall. Is that cool? Yep. See you soon. So, like, we would, and that was with high schoolers, and we had some high schoolers that they were real tough. They didn't want to buy into anything that they thought was for a little kid. And we saw big differences with them just with that trauma-informed care.
We do believe that trauma-informed is beneficial all the way through. So that's why I said earlier, whatever we do, we believe it needs to have a trauma-informed component, pre-K through 12.
I was just going to add, I think anything with consistency and time. There's some research about what curriculums students learn the most from all the different types, whether it's the book we have, what we actually test, what we plan to teach, what we actually teach, what the state says we have to teach. The only curriculum that had a direct correlation to student learning, what kids actually took away, was referred to as the hidden curriculum, essentially the culture of a school. That what I live and what I hear and what I experience every day is what I take with me once I'm gone. And so I think as they have this consistent message and feeling throughout, they tend to believe that and feel that and know that. I think that has to come with experiencing it over time.
Personally, I have had a couple of different trauma-informed trainings in my career, and the one thing that I appreciate and love about Trauma Smart is that, one, it's not a 5 or 10-hour PD you get twice and then no one ever comes to talk to you about it again. They have a program, it's solid, you meet monthly, you get training, then the next year you're getting refreshers, you're still meeting once a month with your person. So I feel like it's a team, they're with you, they're making sure that things are being implemented in your school. They're reminding you through the meetings what things you can do, you're talking about things. So I feel it's solid. Nothing I received in middle school, when I did middle school, when I did elementary, the past 23 years has ever touched what Trauma Smart has.
Not just in trauma, I think in general.
Yeah.
I think whatever we're committing to, though, I think we're all in agreement that we would not leave somebody untrained and just drop the ball. So whether that's their restorative practices or in implementing the trauma program, it would be with great fidelity, and it wouldn't just be leaving someone, and I understand what you mean. I've been at PDs where you have like a 2-hour training and then you don't know what to do and there's no follow-up, there's no guidance, and I like what you guys mentioned, that this is not a journey for being alone, and I think some similar things were mentioned also, like with the restorative practices, so really great programs.
We are committed, and no matter what we're directing with this, is it something that's going to be deep training up front and then revisited throughout and pervasive. Because it's otherwise, you can go to a trauma, and we've actually sent plenty of folks to trauma-informed. When you go to any conference anymore, you can go to a 2-hour session on trauma-informed training. It's worthless. You've got to embed it. It's got to be a part of who you are, and it's got to be continuous.
There's got to be a school-wide approach also,
Right.
like you guys are talking about, speaking the same language so that they're, and kind of like what someone mentioned, are you in orange today, or so whatever that language is, and the teachers have to buy into it and see how it's going to support them in the classroom, and that it's not, another training, that type of thing.
That's right.
So.
We've got to be committed to it. And part of that commitment is obviously you all saying, yes, this is something we're doing. We're putting money towards it, we're putting time towards it, and we're going to be dedicated for the future to do this. That's a big deal. It says a lot to our staff to know that.
Brian, what's the cost on?
Robert, we have and actually, we have this within our ESSER plan to do the 6 elementary schools. I believe we actually have to do the high schools and middle schools as well, which we don't have to do. We can modify that plan. But Robert, do you remember off the top of your head what we're spending on the 6 elementary schools?
A close estimate would be about $170,000 for Next year, we did the 6 remaining elementary schools and remaining preschool. And then Trauma Smart would have matching funds from a grant that they have, a federal grant to match it. And then we would need to address the training time on Wednesdays, training schedule, and then also the monthly, or the building PD time, the building budget for staff.
And that supports sustaining the schools that are already in the process.
Either direction, Trauma Smart or Restorative Practices, requires us to be dedicated throughout the year with all of our training time to be towards that. And so even as we modified the Wednesday schedule for the rest of this year to give some time back to teachers, well, except their teachers, because we still have to do the Trauma Smart training. It is, and I don't think your teachers had any issue with that. Right, I think they would have been upset if we would have stopped the training. So this is a big deal for these buildings. They know it's a big deal. They love that we're doing it, and they want to continue doing it.
Who did the actual integration between Trauma Smart and BIST and PBIS?
I worked with BIST and PBIS. I worked with our consultants for both.
Okay, and that's going to be something that's done as well for, if we try to do it on the secondary level?
If we did it for middle school, yes.
Yeah.
We could theoretically do it for high school, but I don't think that that'd be wise. So, but middle school, I believe would be effective.
No, I mean, not the, I mean, as far as the integration, if we were to choose restorative practices and Trauma Smart.
Okay, so restorative practice already has trauma-informed embedded in it. And so if we were to do, let's say, Trauma Smart first for 2 years and then restorative practices after that, it's a very natural progression because the trauma-informed training is already part of the restorative practices training. So it's an important component of it. Or we could just do the restorative practices training, which has the trauma-informed component already in it.
Yeah, I have a little bit of concern about some of the language you're using, Brian, about whatever we do or if we do. We're all smart people up here and we have different opinions, but you guys are the ones doing the job on the front lines. I'm not going to be comfortable making a decision unless it's based on a recommendation that you, a specific solid recommendation you guys bring us.
Sure.
So I'm not going to sit here and vote, okay, this is what we're going to do, even though I don't know everything there is about it, unless I hear that that's what you're recommending for us to do. Now, you may recommend a recommendation that we may not like and may not go for, but I think it needs to start there.
So that's part of what we're doing tonight, is we wanted to make you give some more information about what's going on with this component. Our recommendation is that we do keep this in place for elementary schools. We believe that that Trauma Smart connected with BIST and PBIS is effective, and it has a good future for us. We believe that we shouldn't touch it. It's working well.
Okay.
Let's let it roll. Okay. So the two easiest recommendations would be the two levels on either end. For the high school, we do believe we need to go one of two directions. That is to go the direction of restorative practices. We could start with doing the Trauma Smart first and then go into restorative practices, or we could just go into restorative practices. We do believe that for RSA, Ray High and South High, it might be effective just to dive right into restorative practices and at least get a good idea about how that works for us as a district. For middle school, for right now, it might be wisest to go with the PBS, BIST, and restorative practice and Trauma Smart, because we already have a good component of PBS and BIST already working there. And what we do believe is that we need to have some in-depth training for our staff and how to work with our students who are experiencing trauma. So if you ask me right now for a recommendation, that would be it.
So either one of those will take resources. So you would have to come back to us with some kind of specific.
It would. And so all of them, and then the two kind of resources we're talking about, a lot of money, a lot of time. And we do have both of those capabilities in the coming years. We've already dedicated ESSER money to be able to, like I said earlier, towards Trauma Smart. We can redirect those funds towards the restorative practices. And we brought that to this board as a K-12 proposal. Obviously, if we did it as a 9-12, it would be much less expensive. It's actually fairly similar in cost between the two. to implement and put in place.
Well, I'd like to just pass my little thoughts out there too. In reference to our high schoolers, I definitely would like to see restorative practice in place in the high school because I think that it is very necessary and needful that we work towards trying to help these kids not have be suspended out of school for long periods of time. We need to work towards those things that will keep them in the classroom versus those things that gets them out of the classroom. I mean, working with the students. I know the school is set up for educating the mind, but we also have to educate the heart too. And I think that Trauma Smart is working towards that, changing the way we think about how we help kids that are having issues that you know of, because some kids might come to school with issues, but you don't know them. And that comes in, we got to learn the signs that indicate that something is going on in this kid's life, because they may not want to share it for various reasons. But it is a challenge, and I understand that it is a challenge for the district in finances, it's a challenge for the teachers in the time, but I also think that the value of the human mind is worth us giving more sacrifice to it to help these kids make a difference in their life before they leave this building, because someone else may never take time to invest in their minds or help them to transition from going a different direction to a better direction. But I think that is the burden that's upon the school district, and not just Raytown School District, but since I'm here, speaking of this one, but it is a burden that is upon school districts all across our nation to help our kids do the best they can. We understand we got kids that have issues that are very well could put them in jail and all of that, but let's do everything we can within our power to help the kids. And let us not always use dollars as a reason not to do things, because we use we do just about whatever we want to do when it comes to things that we really, really want to do. If we want to put something out there, if we want to build something or add something, we'll find a way to do it. And I just refuse to hear and accept the fact that we can't spend the money to help kids make a better choice.
And we have a plan to spend that money. That truly is not a barrier. Truly is not. It's information is what it is. It's not a barrier. And Bobby, you're right that our adolescent kids, they don't understand math. They don't understand English the way they will when they're 25. They also don't understand how to behave. And that was the case when you and I were that age as well. Okay, that has never changed, and it won't change. Especially boys' brains are a little slow to develop sometimes, and they continue to make bad decisions. It is really about us to understand where they're coming from, to help redirect and help them understand what those good decisions are. So yeah, we train the whole body. The whole kid comes in the building, we train the whole kid.
Yeah, that's where it comes in,
We
right
got to.
here.
I like the recommendation that you made and what Bobby said. I think of it like, what's been the picture that I've been painted for me today is seeing that if we could retain our kids and they go through the Trauma Smart, and by the time they're in middle school and high school, then they can have something they have the tools that they need and also whereas restorative practices maybe, like Bobby was saying, that we have an issue right now that after the act, and that can maybe address those things. So
Yeah. Along those lines, I've been somewhat surprised at our number of postgraduates that are dealing with anxiety and not knowing how to handle that. And I think this would be giving them a gift.
Give them some tools.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's true. We want to launch our students to success. Success is not just understanding how to do good on an ACT test, is it? And you know, we want that common language, which you mentioned, Mr. Burton, about. You know, through trauma informed, we can have that common language K through 12. And so a high school teacher will, even though we're not using Trauma Smart, will know through the trauma training within restorative practices how to work with students in the same manner that they've been worked with at the elementary school. So Believe it or not, this calming corner and the wonderful environment you have in the counseling office, that is not unusual for a high school to have the exact same thing.
I was gonna say, I have plenty of calming corners in my room, and I
Darn
use them
right.
myself on a daily basis.
You're darn right. There's a reason why we don't play Metallica in the counseling office.
President Burton. President Burton.
Go ahead.
No, I was just letting you know you were, it's on the side.
The extra training that it's going to take for our teachers, that's one of the concerns that I have. And if we're training through our Wednesday sessions and professional development days, to go through this training, how many times a month did you have to have your teachers stay 2 or 3 hours after class, after school, or a couple hours? How much extra time is it going to take for our teachers based on what they've already got to do?
So we work out plans. It's rather unique to each building. But part of what I talked with my coordinator team today, our district coordinator team, is that we need to be concerned about how we're going to segment our training into next year. And we have a lot of new things coming up. We're going to be adopting a new ELA curriculum or ELA resource for elementary schools. We're going to adopt a new testing platform for STAR. Along with many other things, we need to incorporate that training in. What I told them, though, is that the blocks of training time will not change. So we have our couple days of training in the fall that we do typically when we come back. We have our Wednesdays. But part of what we're doing, too, is we're paying staff when they're staying late. I'm not sure if we did that with your buildings or not.
A lot, yeah.
Right, but we're paying staff when we're getting outside of those windows of time. So we're not expecting them to stay late without compensating them, because we believe that if we find it valuable, we're going to pay for your time because your time is valuable. So we will work out the logistics of that. And sometimes it's about taking blocks of teachers out of the building for an entire day and bringing substitutes in. I will say that we've had more ability even a couple of years ago to do that sort of thing. Like right now, we don't want to take anybody out for anything, but we will find a way to get it done.
And I was going to say, on the current Wednesday schedule, I think buildings probably have about 30 minutes outside of contract time. We were really lucky, got to do this during last year when we didn't have Wednesdays because of how everything fell with learning. So at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, teachers had 2 hours after teaching through this pandemic, full day, after school was dismissed, going till 6 o'clock Zoom training. But one thing, we wiped pretty much anything else. This is all we did to try to compensate for that. But to hear the conversations and the feedback from teachers, even after those really, really long days, 2 hours after, never did I hear one if it wasn't worth it, or frustration, or tired of doing it, which if anybody had any time to have an excuse, last year was the time.
Thank you.
President Burke.
Same at Spring Valley.
I am very pleased to have had this presentation. I am excited about how it's impacting the culture at your schools and eventually all of our elementary schools. It sounds like a great program, so thank you for allowing us this opportunity today. And we know that with any understanding, as those teachers and staff reach out to students and work to understand where they're coming from, there is importance that should be applied to cultural competency as well, in understanding them culturally, in understanding them with the equity lens as well. Does Trauma Smart speak to that, or does our cultural competency program speak to that?
Yes, you cannot be trauma informed without being culturally competent. And, this is something that our team, as mental health providers, have been going on our own personal journey of DEI, of diversity, equity, inclusion work, to ensure that we're able and comfortable and willing to have these conversations among our team, apply it in our content with our schools. So that's not something that I feel like we are there yet. We're on that journey ourselves. but you cannot be. It's one of the 6 principles of being trauma-informed. You have to bring in cultural diversity, equity, making sure that we have access to services and support, and the individual and who they are as a person is really key to that. So I feel very strongly about that aspect of it.
If we can go,
Thank you so much. And Ms. Keck, I appreciate that and sharing the information about the Trauma Smart program. Dr. Jones, Principal Gabbard, Ms. Jordan, when it comes to the schools and working with the students, now your schools, do they have the cultural competency program in place already?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this was no surprise, wasn't a huge learning curve, and everyone at your school has participated in the cultural competency element?
Trauma Smart essentially became our focus of our cultural competency. And that's another reason why I feel like the label of trauma isn't totally fair, of that when we look at why is this happening or what's behind that, a lot of the time our conversation, especially where it comes most relevant, I feel like when we have deep, cultural competency conversations, is about the term of disrespect. And is this coming from a true intent of disrespect, or are we just perceiving as disrespectful? And how does that perception affect how I respond to it? And so having this has allowed us another avenue, another lens to have those conversations and how we perceive our students' behavior, and then again, how in turn affects our response.
And Dr. Huff, the schools, as we expand to the elementary schools, in addition to Trauma Smart, will they also have cultural competency training?
Oh, yes, most definitely.
Because right now it's optional, right?
No, every building has a cultural competency, either team or champion.
Optional with the teachers.
Yeah, so, okay,
So all teachers participate?
yes. Yeah. And so part of what we need to do, and the term unconscious bias comes to mind. Really, no matter what we do, we need to make sure that is a component of our training. Because you mentioned about, the student who is being defiant or disrespectful or disruptive or whatever, but disrespectful is probably the biggest one. Each one of us would define disrespectful in a different manner. And a lot of that harkens back to our own unconscious bias. And so a lot of what trauma informed is trying to get at the adult's behavior and thought processes. So yeah, it's a huge component of who we are and what we do. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that we're doing with our Cultural Competency Committee is going much deeper into the training this year, reflecting back on who we are as a district, what are our processes and procedures, and going through that audit process to seeing, what is our equity like here in the district by going through that equity audit. So yeah, we're committed to it. And while it's not necessarily a component of this, you can think of them as parallel components that really are inseparable, because whatever a student brings with themselves, they bring their whole selves to the table. And we react because of our own culture, our own history. And we need to first start with ourselves to determine why we react or respond the way that we do. Mm-hmm. A lot of that is based on our own culture and understanding who we are, so we can understand how they are, and we can hopefully make a bridge between the two.
And
so yeah, inseparable.
When I come in to work in a building, I come in to help change a kid's behavior, but I never change the kid's behavior. I'm changing what the adults are doing. Because I can't change their behavior unless the adults change. So unless how they're thinking changes, then nothing gets better or changes for that said student.
Thank you, everyone.
I want to get clarity, because I thought we had this meeting a while back, that the teachers are not required to attend cultural competency. You have a group in each building.
Yeah, there's two different things we're talking about there. We do have the Cultural Competency Committee,
right,
which is the district-wide. We provide direction and guidance. Every one of the buildings has a cultural competency component within the building. Sometimes it's a team, sometimes it's a person, but all of them have a plan that they've developed of specific things that they're doing. And no, it's not optional. It's like no other PD in our district is optional for teachers. In their plans, it is specific for their entire staff.
So it's required of them to
Oh,
attend?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't get that when we talked the
Yes.
last time.
So the
Okay.
part that I think where the required comes in, we haven't really gotten to the point where we're requiring all buildings to do this specific thing in cultural competency. But they all turn their plans into the committee, and we look that through and make sure that we're doing stuff that all makes sense in the same direction. Now, the part that's going to get a little bit more formalized is as we go through this audit, and as we go through deeper training with the cultural competency committee, there will be some more formalized processes that go out to the schools. But yeah, everybody's in it.
Okay, good deal.
Yes.
From here, I think we'll come back to the board with a formal recommendation. That includes the costs, timelines, etc., and recommending what you've heard tonight, and then the board can discuss it that night, decide if that's what they want to do.
And then whatever we say we're going to do, I think I heard it from everybody that you all are going to protect the teacher's time. I think I heard that commitment, right? Because we talked about self-care out there, and you understand.
Well, part of it is that we have to remove some stuff. And
That's what I was going to say. What can you streamline and
That'll be part of the recommendation
That's right.
as well.
thank you.
That's right.
Thank you.
Great job.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
just-
That was wonderful.
It was.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
Really,
much.
yeah.
Yeah, thank
Especially, I didn't remember your name, but I especially like your mannerism. I especially like the way you say, coming into that building to work with the teachers, and that's awesome. Because you change the teachers, you're gonna affect the culture, the atmosphere, everything is gonna be changed. So I really, really appreciate the presentation. I just want to commend you guys for an excellent job.
We're going to schedule corner time for each board member.
Corner time?
Corner time, we're not relaxing.
corner?
corner
I have
time.
an extra box of
Yeah.
stuff already.
We need
Thank
one-
you.
We need one in the boardroom.
Yeah, we got a corner here, a corner there.
Very good.
Next, in unfinished business, we have a safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan.
Now, before we make a motion, I wanted Steve and Brian and Darlene can speak to kind of where we're at staffing-wise and what's going on, because you've gotten a lot of emails. I know
Yes.
one from staff, but you've gotten emails about, the number of drivers that are absent, buildings and grounds because of sickness. So briefly, they're going to speak to that. Go ahead.
We're at a critical level in regards to our absences on the operations side, and I'll just speak to the operations side. 25 to 30% absentee rate in food service, transportation, buildings and grounds, technology. All those departments are facing significant absences. It's impacting our ability to operate and function. Just today, we had 12 drivers who were absent, which caused us to use everyone in the district who has a CDL and can operate a bus, with the exception of one. We had one driver left that it was waiting in the wings, but we are getting calls every morning, every night. We're having drivers who can drive in the morning, and then when they get done with their route, they're telling Kevin, hey, I won't be back this afternoon. I'm going to go get tested because I don't feel good. And so we are getting at we're at a critical level in transportation. Food service, we've reduced services from what used to be breakfast, lunch, after school meal, a la carte, snacks. We do breakfast and lunch now because that's what we can staff. And even there, we're getting critically close to being able to provide, at that point, even full menus. We may have to start reducing menus because of preparation. Technology, Zach's back there, and he can tell you about the workload that's increased. We have computers and systems that go down all the time, and we're working hard and fighting to provide just those basic the functionality of our technology systems. Buildings and grounds, our maintenance crew, our folks who work on plumbing, electricity, HVAC, we're pulling them off those work orders, putting them into buildings to do custodial work. And really, our custodians right now are just pretty much taking care of trash and sweeping floors. And our maintenance crew is going in to help them do that. And then after hours, they're identifying those major work orders that need to be done, and they're coming back and getting those major work orders, emergency work orders done. So I say that to say this, from an operational side, we are facing critical shortages in our staffing, and I tell you, we are 2 drivers away from starting to reduce routes. And so what that means is if we get 2 more drivers who don't come in, and we can't back them, this is a long-term issue. I mean, they're not gone for a day, they're gone for 10 days, or 5 days. And so, currently, we have a couple more drivers miss, and we can get into that loop, and we don't have a backfill for those absences. We will have a rotating program of routes that we won't run that day. As an example, bus 55 on Monday is not going to run. And so those students, either one won't come, or we'll have to go get them later.
And we'll let parents know. It's not like they're
Exactly.
not going to know.
But the next day will be bus 45, and the next day will be bus 35. And so the same kids aren't missing every day. So that keeps the system running to the best of our ability. It's better than shutting down the entire transportation department. So that's just one example. Marlene, she's going to speak a little bit more globally about our absenteeism.
Right. I monitor every day what the absence is. Every day the principals get a report that says unfilled positions by date. And so I monitor that every day. And basically right now, we are probably at the worst we've ever been with positives. We're not only, because of the new variant, we're not just positive of people that aren't vaccinated. We actually have more people now we have a lot of people that are positive now that are vaccinated. So that's raised that. And I told Steve, I was trying to figure out, like, I don't have hard numbers for you, but it's around 25% more. We had last Friday, we had over 200 people absent, and 2 years ago, that was just unheard of. Like, we wouldn't, that was a Friday, so we have more of that, and that's everyone, that's not just certified. So we met with principals last week and said, how close are you to needing to shut down a classroom or whatever? And they didn't say a whole lot. And Tony brought up, the principals don't want to say we're going to shut down classrooms. They make it work. How are we making it work? Well, we have hired 2 building subs per building. They are being used every day. Even if they're not being used at that building, the principals get together and text and move them to other buildings. So that's one of the ways. The other thing we're doing is we have some IAs that if they can, we try not to take the SPED IAs, but if we have Reg Ed IAs or like library clerks, office clerks that have sub-certification, they are paid sub-pay and they go into a classroom. The other thing we're doing is we're putting on occasion counselors in there. We're putting Title I reading teachers, Title I math, that sort of thing. APs are going in, admin interns are going in, principals are going in at times. There's kind of rotating, and then we even have a rotation. Administrators I sent out a Google form and they sign up for days. So we do not shut down classrooms unless we absolutely have to. We did have a situation, and about, I think you always inform the board if we have to shut down a classroom.
Not the latest one, we've had some sped classrooms shut down.
We had 2 sped classrooms. I was on a text on Sunday, and every teacher and IA was gone, and those are kids we can't keep safe unless we have enough people. So we did shut down those 2 classrooms. We got those parents called on Sunday. So
Student attendance over the last 4 days has been 84.85%, 82.21%, 85.19%, and today it was 88.51%. And we're generally around 95, somewhere there, 96. You look at some of the elementary schools, I'm looking at Robinson traditionally is around 95%, 96% attendance, and they're at 86, 89, 90. It's hitting them hard. So that's just students. So that being said, that's why we're bringing this back to you and asking you to make a motion for this board to require masking in our district buildings.
think that's a no-brainer.
I think it's a no-brainer, and I do have a question because when we voted about having the masking, based on following our guidelines and everything else, and I'm seeing this, if this, I don't think this is going to happen, but if this would change in a few weeks or whatever, my concern is just with the level of anxiety of our staff, like our teachers and everything else. Is there any way within this recommendation to address that? And I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear enough.
I think we already did.
What's that?
I think we already did. You're
Well,
talking
this
about,
is the
can't-
ordinance for as long as, right here, okay, so right there, buses until February, okay, so I wanted to
I
clarify
put that on the
with that.
15th, the motion says, and I have mine up,
I'm
masking
looking at
indoors at all
this, and then
facilities and buses
like
until
this.
February 15th, because you're meeting on
Okay, that's what got
You're
me.
meeting on the 14th, and this
Okay.
board every month needs to come and decide whether or not they want masks, whether there's an ordinance or not. Yeah, there's an
Thank you.
ordinance in place, but this is the board making this decision to have masks, not because of what Jackson, even though you're gonna follow orders, this is you saying, we're going to have masks.
Thank you for that clarification.
Well, and that's what I
too.
appreciate the change, because my concern last time was
Right.
letting one politician have say in all of our buildings when they don't have authority there. At least we're going on record as the board, making the decision for our kids, our employees, our buildings. So I
And
appreciate
it's
having
state
this
statute
version of
says-
it.
State statute and board policy supports that.
Yeah,
You
that
can do that.
Thank you for clarifying that. That was my concern as well, that we can make decisions for Raytown based on our staff's needs and their safety.
And you know what, in 2 weeks, if it looks like this thing is complete reversal, and you want to end this thing prior to the 15th, okay, let's say the 3rd, the mayor's ordinance runs out on the 3rd, okay, but yours is still going, and by the 7th, okay, we're looking good, you can have an emergency meeting and remove the mask, if that's what you want.
And I'm guessing we would do that still based on your recommendation.
You bet.
all right?
Mr.
I think
President?
the indication here is that we need to make the recommendation because else we will not have school, right?
Potentially,
Yeah.
that's why we're making this recommendation in this motion.
Mr. President, I move that the Board of Education will require masking indoors at all facilities and buses until February 15th, 2022.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. Motion passes.
When will that be effective? Immediately?
Starting tomorrow, we'll send out the notice tonight.
All right.
How many, just talking to your boys, were most of the students still wearing masks?
Seth and Luke would tell you that the majority of the high school students at Raytown High are wearing their masks.
That's what my daughter
Or the same
told
thing
me.
at South High too.
And middle schools,
Yeah.
same way.
Yeah.
I had a teacher tell me out of 100 students, he had 4 not wearing them.
Really?
Yeah, we had a teacher over at
the high school.
Raytown High that, has certain, I'm not gonna mention the name, but asked, didn't have to ask her students, they did it for her.
Yeah, I've been hearing the same stories. Yes.
It's a wonderful, the kids are owning it, they are.
How do you shut that phone down? Throw that thing in the trash. The phone maybe.
All right,
How many students do we have vaccinated now? Quite a few of them?
I couldn't tell you the exact number. I do know the clinic they had the second shot they had several kids come back and get the second. We had actually more people walk in off the street to get the boosters. We're going to start, we got another clinic, or we're trying to set up some.
We are done with clinics. Quite honestly, we're not seeing very much of a response. And the Jackson County clinics are so easy to get into.
Yeah.
That you can show up at the clinics over on Powell, or I think it's not Powell.
Ralph Powell Road. Yep.
So,
We had a number of students at the one at the library that was on the
Yeah.
30th. There were,
Josh
Quite a
Franklin
few.
went to the library and got this.
I don't understand.
Are you ready for a motion?
y'all ready to watch the game?
I moved the board adjourn the regular board meeting at
8:04.
8:05.
Second.
Motion made and seconded.